Joining us now is Dr. Sara Polley from Betty Ford Hazelden. And Dr. Polley, why don't we get you to say your credentials because you have a significant number of them.
Oh, yes, sure. So I'm the medical director of the youth continuum here at Hazelden, and I'm a psychiatrist by training. So I'm a physician and specialize in child, adolescent, and adult psychiatry, as well as addiction medicine.
You gave via a letter, a testimony to a legislative committee, and it had strong warnings about young people under the age of 25 using marijuana. Obviously, this law that they're talking about is for age 21 and under, but tell me about what you find the science says about the impact on both young men and women who are, young adults under 25.
Yeah, so I think this is a really important point in this debate that we don't always talk about. People under the age of 25 have different and more sensitive brains than those over the age of 25. And so that's for men and women of that age. And really what's happening is that the front part of our brain, which is called the prefrontal cortex, is still under development until the mid-20s. And because of that, it's actually extra sensitive to the impacts of things like marijuana and other toxins. And really exposing the brain at that time can cause changes to your brain development, which can really impact a lot of things. It can impact your risk of developing mental illness. It can impact your risk of developing addiction later in life. And it can make it harder to control impulses and make it harder to control emotional regulation. And so it's a really important topic that I think we need to talk about.
So you're talking about changes that are permanent. And how
That's
much do you
correct.
have to smoke or consume of marijuana to get that way?
Yeah, that's the actually hard part is that we don't have a lot of research right now to be able to make those really distinct kind of determinations. We know that heavy use causes it. And when I say heavy use, we usually are referring to using some marijuana product 3 times a week or more. And we also know using products with high concentrations of THC can cause the problem. But there really is individual difference in this. And that's the part that we don't know from research quite yet, is who is at risk of developing these complications and how can we preferentially warn those people that their brains are going to be more sensitive.
It's hard for me to wrap my head around somebody up to 25 having that kind of a risk, and then maybe somebody who's 30 not having any risk. What kind of risk does it pose for people who are over 25?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think right now marijuana is extremely popular. I mean, perception of risk for marijuana is at all-time lows when you ask adults and young people about, is it risky to use marijuana or not? And we know that even in an adult, so over the age of 25, marijuana impacts decision making. It makes somebody more impulsive. Some of the same ways that alcohol impacts the brain, we see that happen with marijuana too. And so it's not safe to drive after you've used marijuana for similar reasons. And so, whereas the changes might not be as dramatic with brain development, when you're under the influence of marijuana, it does impact the brain.
And you talked about guardrails that you'd like to see, in terms of this legislation, because it does look like if it's not this year, it probably is next year that this will pass.
Yeah, and I get excited actually that we're talking about this right now because I think Minnesota generally does such a great job with balancing, commercial interests and public health interests. And this is a time when we can do just that. I think if we really work to make some kind of stipulations or guardrails when it comes to legalization in our state, we can try to keep people safe, particularly young people. So for example, if we limit the potency of THC products that are for sale, it'll be harder for young people to get access to high potency products, which could cause more risk of brain damage. The other thing is that when we normalize use of a substance, we really encourage young people to do it. And so we saw that with tobacco. We've seen that with alcohol, right? The more popular it is, the more we see ads, billboards, people are using it out on the street. Those things all make young people think that using is normal and using is safe. And so if we can place limits on those types of behaviors or that type of advertising, that's another way that I think we can really have some successes in Minnesota in preventing harm to our youth.
You brought up potency, because that makes a difference too. Is potency an issue, from state to state or region to region? I'm just not sure. And, how much of a problem is that?
Yeah, so many of the state laws are just now starting to recognize that we need to have some limits on the potency of THC that we're allowing to be for sale, because companies know that THC is the psychoactive component in marijuana, and it's the part that people like. It's the part that gives people euphoria, and it's also the part that's addictive. And so companies are incentivized, really, if they want to sell their product and make money, to make a really potent product, because people will like it more, people will become more addicted, people will come back as customers. And so those companies that make it aren't going to be the ones to say, oh, I think this is too high of a potency. In fact, there's people working on trying to get like 99% potent marijuana products, because that's what's going to produce a good high for people. But really, the higher the potency, the more danger to the brain. And so by putting caps kind of on the amount of potency, kind of like we do with alcohol, right? We put limits on the amount of alcohol that a beverage can contain. That's a way we can try to keep people safe too.
It sounds like you think that if it's legalized here, as it is in so many other places, there should be restrictions,
Yeah.
including maybe something that you can't have until you're older than 25, which I
Yeah.
don't think is that anywhere in the country? Do they have something like that?
No, I think in most places they've used 21 just kind of out of
Yeah.
convenience, because that's what we do with alcohol. But if you really want to look at the science, we really should have the age be more like 25. And so that would be an area that Minnesota could really set itself apart as a place that is really valuing public health and valuing medicine and science, by making that the determination that you have to be 25 to purchase products.
Wow. And how about addiction, treating the addict? Is it hard to recover from an addiction to marijuana?
Yeah, that's something that I think isn't talked about very much, is that, marijuana is addictive despite kind of misinformation you might see online. Marijuana produces dependence, it produces withdrawal, and it produces some of the same symptoms for people that we see with other substances of misuse and abuse. And so there are people whose lives can be destroyed singularly from marijuana use. And I know that's hard for people to believe, because there's a lot of people who use and don't have problems. But there are, similarly, a lot of people that do use and do have problems. And so when they're coming in for treatment, sometimes it can be hard because they're using other substances too. And sometimes they don't want to believe that the marijuana is actually also a problem, because it feels like, oh, well, I know that opioids are a bigger problem. And yes, that might be true, but marijuana is also a problem. And so we have to work with people to try to help them understand that.
Well, Dr. Sara Polley, thank you so much. Fascinating information, and we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
You may be thinking I should get into the marijuana business now, so when it becomes legal, I can make a lot of money. Well, coming up, the reality from marijuana consultant Ashley Piccolo.
Took effect in early March, and daily patient applications have doubled.